or Parev says, as we say in Armenian. I'm Armineh Babikian.
And I'm Jennifer Thompson.
And we're very honored to be here today, not only to present on our disaster response efforts, but also to advocate for Armenia and Artsakh as our story continues to be muddled in Western and international media. Today we will be presenting on innovation from America to Armenia, providing remote education for rehab clinicians in Armenia treating acquired amputation during post-armed conflict. I would like to start with a brief overview of OT and rehab development in Armenia. It's important to note that Armenia was under the Soviet Union for 70 years. Even though it has been an independent republic since 1991, there are still remnants of the Soviet healthcare system, disability stigma, and institutionalization to this day. Rehab was introduced to Armenia 32 years ago by Project HOPE during humanitarian efforts. Occupational therapy was formalized in 2004 with the development of the first and only university program. The field is relatively young still, and there's minimal public awareness of the role of rehab and OT. However, health system strengthening is now a national priority following the Third Nagorno-Karabakh War and the WHO rehab trauma assessment that was performed in 2021. For those who are unfamiliar with the conflict, I have included a map here. Nagorno-Karabakh, or Artsakh as we say in Armenian, is an ethnically Armenian oblast that was strategically given to Azerbaijan following the fall of the Soviet Union. Artsakh has been fighting for independence ever since and recognized themselves as an autonomous region with their own government, army, and currency. Over these 3 decades, there have been 2 other wars regarding territorial integrity, as Azerbaijani leaders continue to provoke conflict, spread misinformation, and promote anti-Armenian initiatives with the intention to create a pan-Turkic empire and expansion of oil pipelines. However, this most recent war was the most deadly due to the use of illegal arms, chemical weaponry, and strong military support from Azerbaijani allies and NATO members. There were also systemic challenges, as it overlapped with the peak of COVID, overwhelming the Armenian healthcare system. The hospital in the conflict region was bombed, and there's only 1 rehab center in all of Artsakh. My organization, Therapists for Armenia, worked in collaboration with local institutions, stakeholders, and other diaspora healthcare organizations, as well as humanitarian relief efforts to respond to the unmet rehab needs. There were over 11,000 injured soldiers and civilians. Armenia was dealing with a limited workforce capacity. All males were drafted to the war. There is no acute care rehab currently in Armenia, and most of the clinicians serving injured soldiers were actually pediatric therapists volunteering their time and were unfamiliar with these types of injuries. Our humanitarian efforts included sending diaspora rehab volunteers, donating medical equipment, creating a rehab resource library, and providing remote consultations. Additionally, we organized a weekly webinar series over a 4-month period. The topics included conflict-related injury, pathology, rehab assessment, and interventions. Due to the use of cluster munitions and other advanced arms, amputation was identified as an immediate priority for training and capacity building. Although remote support may not have been feasible previously, following COVID, webinars were a very familiar platform to optimize our remote humanitarian education and service efforts.
Based on the occupational therapy needs identified by the clinicians in Armenia, in conjunction with my own personal clinical experience working as an acute rehab OT specializing in lower extremity amputation, we designed a 4-part series focused on treatment protocols and interdisciplinary collaboration through the continuum of care. Topics of our webinars included the role of OT for pre-prosthetic limb loss rehabilitation, ADLs and transfers, prosthetic fitting and gait training, and community reintegration and peer support following combat injury. We made a strong effort to ensure these webinars were accessible by use of professional medical translation and simultaneous interpretation from English to Armenia. We utilized pre- and post-webinar polling to assess the clinical understanding of the content that was presented. Some challenges with these evaluation methods include concern that the information was unclear, as some of the clinical terminology that was used may not have a direct translation to Armenian or is not used frequently. The polling question formats may have also been unclear or unfamiliar to participants. We acknowledge that there are cultural differences in education, as OT in Armenia is rooted within special education and social services. However, the war highlighted a myriad of physiological and functional needs within the acute care context. Additionally, we acknowledge a potential power dynamic as Western educated clinicians working within the United States may have impacted participation and engagement. We also noted the following barriers. We did not require pre-registration for our webinar series in order to improve access to participants. However, this resulted in unpredictability with participant disciplines and the levels of clinical experience that they had. As we heard in the rehab emergency session on Sunday, our local partners were overwhelmed with their own disaster response, so we could not obtain accurate information about availability of durable medical equipment. It is important to note that the Armenian clinicians of all disciplines were also experiencing concurrent trauma, going through their own personal grief about the war, the loss of their loved ones, and instability of their future, in addition to serving as healthcare clinicians and providers during the COVID-19 pandemic. This really speaks to the strength, perseverance, and coping on behalf of the clinicians and Armenian community as a whole.
As a result of the growing demand for educational resources, Therapists for Armenia hosted a post-conflict rehab symposium, journal club, and case-based learning events. We continue to partner with local stakeholders and co-developed the first ever post-professional rehab fellowship for Armenia and Artsakh. This co-creation not only addresses capacity building, but also highlights emergency preparedness to support health system strengthening and rehab development for Armenia and Artsakh. Thank you. Shachnoragalan.
And merci.
Okay, thank you. If there's a question, now is the time for questions from the floor.
Thank you.
Thank you.